When I turn off the light 3 times, you have to leave immediately. Annie whispered the sentence so softly that it felt more like a breath than a warning. She looked around, first left, then right, her eyes moving faster than her body, as if she were afraid the room itself might be listening. Only when she was sure no one was watching did she lean close enough for her lips to brush the air near the billionaire's ear. Ethan Caldwell jerked in his chair. The reaction surprised even him. His shoulders lifted, his spine stiffened, and for a split second his hand tightened around the edge of the table. He had spent years training himself not to react, not to flinch, not to give away anything that could be used against him. But the voice had come from nowhere, small and urgent, carrying a seriousness that didn't belong to a child. He bent down immediately, bringing his face closer to hers. "What did you say?" he asked. Annie swallowed. Her hands were clenched together at her waist, fingers digging into her palms the way children did when they were trying not to cry. She shook her head once, then leaned in again, closer, as if repeating it might make it real. "When I turn off the light 3 times, she whispered, slower now. "Careful. You have to leave. Right away." Ethan frowned. "Who told you to say that?" he asked. "No one," Annie said. Her answer came too fast. She glanced over his shoulder, then back at him, her eyes wide and shiny but dry. She wasn't crying. She was afraid of something else. "You shouldn't be talking to me," Ethan said quietly. "Your mom might not like that." "I know," Annie replied. That single sentence unsettled him more than the warning itself. She shifted her feet, clearly ready to run, then hesitated. Her shoulders lifted as she took a breath that sounded much too big for her small chest. "They're going to put something in your drink," she whispered. Ethan stilled. "What?" he asked. "They said you won't be able to move," Annie continued. "Just for a little while. Long enough." "Who said that?" Ethan pressed. Annie's mouth opened, then closed again. She shook her head, panic flickering across her face. "I'm not supposed to tell," she said. "They said I shouldn't." Before Ethan could respond, a shadow fell across them. A man had stepped close, too close. He was in his late 20s or early 30s, clean cut, dressed well enough to belong at the table without belonging to it. His smile was thin and practiced, his eyes sharp as they dropped to Annie. "There you are," he murmured, crouching slightly so he was level with her. His voice was soft, almost kind. "What are you doing?" "Huh?" Annie froze. "Do you remember what we talked about?" the man asked, his smile never reaching his eyes. "About keeping promises?" Her lower lip trembled. She started. The man's hand came down lightly on her shoulder. Not enough to hurt, just enough to claim. "You remember, right?" he whispered. "I told you I'd bring you something sweet if you were good." Ethan straightened slowly. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. The man looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh, no problem at all, Mr. Caldwell. I was just making sure she wasn't bothering you." Annie didn't look at him. She stared at the floor, her body rigid under the man's hand. "Take your hand off her," Ethan said. The words were calm, but there was no mistaking the authority behind them. The man hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "She's fine," he said. "Aren't you, Annie?" Annie shook her head. "No," she whispered. That was enough. Ethan stood abruptly and reached down, pulling Annie toward him in one smooth motion. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her against his side, placing his body between her and the man without hesitation. "She's with me," Ethan said. The man's smile faltered. "Mr. Caldwell, there's no need." "There is," Ethan cut in. He tightened his hold on Annie slightly, feeling how small she was, how fast her heart was beating. "You don't touch children. Ever." Several heads nearby turned. The man straightened, his expression hardening now that the performance had cracked. "She was just confused," he said. "Kids imagine things." Ethan looked down. Annie's fingers were fisted in his jacket, gripping it like a lifeline. "She doesn't look confused," Ethan said. "She looks scared." The man took a step back, his jaw tightening. "This is a misunderstanding. Then you won't mind stepping away," Ethan replied. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the man nodded once, sharply, and retreated, his eyes lingering on Annie with something dark and warning in them before he disappeared into the crowd. Ethan exhaled slowly. "You're safe," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Annie didn't answer. She pressed her face into his side, her small shoulders shaking now that the danger was no longer pretending to be polite. "It's okay," Ethan said, his voice lower, steadier. "I've got you." She pulled back just enough to look up at him. "You didn't believe me before," she said. He held her gaze. "I do now," he said. Her eyes filled, but she nodded, as if that mattered more than anything else. She lifted one hand and held up 3 fingers between them. Her voice barely a sound. "3 times," she whispered. "Please." Ethan nodded once. "I'm listening," he said, and this time, he meant it. Annie did not remember the first time she learned how to be quiet. She only knew that by the time she was 6, silence felt as natural as breathing. She sat on an upside-down milk crate in the narrow space behind the kitchen, her legs swinging just enough to burn off nervous energy without drawing attention. The crate wobbled slightly every time she moved, and she kept one hand pressed against it to steady herself. Her other hand rested in her lap, curled around nothing. The candy the man had promised her was not there. She had never expected it to be. The kitchen was loud in the way only working places were loud. Not screaming, not chaos, just constant motion. Pans clanged. Someone cursed under their breath. A dishwasher hummed angrily as if it resented being awake this late. Annie watched it all with the same careful eyes she used everywhere. Watching meant you could prepare. Watching meant you might get out of the way in time. Her mother moved quickly between stations, tying an apron tighter around her waist as she passed. "Stay right there," she said without stopping. "Don't touch anything hot." "I know," Annie replied. Her mother glanced back at her, tired eyes softening for half a second. Then she was gone again, swallowed by steam and orders shouted in clipped phrases. Annie swung her legs and listened. That was how it had started. Listening. She hadn't meant to hear anything. She had been tracing shapes in spilled flour on the stainless steel counter, when the voices drifted in from the small storage hallway near the wine room. 2 men. Low voices. Not angry. Careful. "Has to be tonight," one of them said. Annie froze. She didn't look up. Grown-ups said things they weren't supposed to say all the time. Usually it was about money or other people or how tired they were. Usually it didn't matter. This felt different. The words were slower, quieter, like secrets that didn't want to be heard. "What if he refuses again?" the other man asked. "He won't," the first replied. "Not after the drink." Annie's fingers tightened against the counter. "What's in it?" the second voice asked. "Something mild." The first said, "Temporary. Enough to slow him down. Enough to scare him." There was a pause, then a soft laugh that made Annie's stomach twist. "We just need his signature," the man continued. "After that, it's done." "Inem." Annie's heart began to beat too fast. She didn't understand everything they were saying, but she understood enough. Drink, scare, signature. Those words didn't belong together. She leaned back instinctively, and her elbow knocked into a stack of metal lids. They crashed to the floor with a sharp, echoing clang. The voices stopped. Annie squeezed her eyes shut. Footsteps approached. She opened her eyes just in time to see 2 pairs of shoes stop in front of her. One man crouched down, his smile wide and strange, his eyes not smiling at all. "Well," he said softly. "What do we have here?" I'm just waiting," Annie said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. The other man looked around, then back at her. "Did you hear anything just now?" Annie shook her head quickly. Too quickly. "That's okay," the crouching man said. "Kids hear things all the time. They don't understand them. Itty. Telbiar." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wrapped piece of candy, holding it between his fingers like it was a prize. "You like candy, right?" he asked. Annie stared at it. Her mouth felt dry. "If you stay quiet," he continued, lowering his voice, "this can be yours. Deal?" She nodded. That was the part he remembered. The nod. Not the way her hand shook, not the way her stomach hurt, just the nod. Now, sitting behind the kitchen again, Annie replayed that moment over and over. The sound of the lids falling, the man's smile, the candy. Her fingers clenched tighter. Candy didn't fix things. Candy didn't make bad things go away. Annie knew that. She had known it since the year her father left and never came back. Since the night her mother cried quietly in the bathroom so Annie wouldn't hear. Grown-ups made promises that didn't last. Candy melted. Silence stayed. She slid off the crate when no one was looking and moved closer to the door that led to the dining room. She wasn't supposed to go there. Her mother had told her that more than once. But she also knew the way things worked. When people were busy, they didn't see children. Children were furniture. Children were background noise. She peered through the narrow gap between the door and the frame. That was when she saw him. He didn't look dangerous. That was the strange part. He looked calm, still, like someone who believed nothing bad could reach him. He sat straight in his chair, listening to the man beside him, nodding occasionally. He looked like someone who made decisions, like someone who said no and expected it to matter. Annie's chest tightened. She thought of the drink, the paper, the signature. She thought of the way the men had spoken about him, like he was already helpless. Her heart thudded painfully as she stepped forward. She remembered her mother's voice telling her to stay put. She remembered the candy. She remembered the promise she had nodded to. Then she remembered something else. A feeling she had learned young and never forgotten. The feeling that if she didn't speak now, something would happen that couldn't be undone. She walked out. The room felt enormous. Too bright. Too open. Her shoes barely made a sound on the floor, but every step felt loud in her head. She reached his chair and lifted the napkin the way she had seen servers do 100 times. Her hands shook so badly she thought she might drop it, and then she whispered, "If this moment moved you, please like this video. Tell us what you felt in the comments where you are watching right now. And subscribe to the channel for more stories about courage, truth, and quiet justice." Now, standing pressed against Ethan Caldwell's side, Annie felt the weight of everything she had done settle into her bones. The man who had offered her candy stood a few steps away, watching. Her mother's voice called her name somewhere behind them, panic sharp and rising. Annie clutched Ethan's jacket and tried to be brave. He rested his hand gently on her shoulder, steady and firm. "It's okay," he said again, his voice low. "You're not in trouble." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that speaking up changed things, that being heard mattered. She looked up at him and nodded. Once, in the distance, a light flickered. Ethan Caldwell had learned, over years of boardrooms and courtrooms, that danger rarely announced itself. It arrived quietly, wrapped in politeness, disguised as opportunity. It smiled, shook hands, waited for permission. He had survived by recognizing patterns early and trusting his instincts when something felt wrong. What unsettled him now was that his instincts had been triggered not by a balance sheet or a hostile negotiation, but by a 6-year-old girl clinging to his jacket as if it were the only solid thing in the room. He kept his arm around Annie, his palm resting flat against her shoulder blade. Her heart was beating fast, too fast, and he adjusted his stance slightly, angling his body so she was shielded from the man standing a few feet away. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his eyes never leaving the young man who had crouched beside Annie moments earlier. The man smiled again, but the confidence had drained from it. "Daniel Price," he said smoothly. "I work for you. Or with you, I suppose. We've met." Ethan nodded once. He remembered him now. The son. The one who had arrived at the company 2 years earlier with a resume that checked every box and a humility that felt almost rehearsed. The one who never pushed too hard, who accepted refusals with polite nods and came back weeks later with revised proposals and fresh smiles. "You were touching her," Ethan said. Daniel lifted his hand slightly, palms out. "I was helping her. She seemed lost." Annie pressed closer to Ethan's side. "She wasn't lost," Ethan replied. "She was threatened." Daniel laughed softly, the sound brittle. "Come on. She's a child. Children misunderstand things. They imagine danger where there isn't any." Ethan felt something cold settle behind his ribs. "Annie," he said gently, without looking down. "Do you know this man?" She hesitated, then nodded once. "He talked to me in the kitchen." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What did he say to you?" Ethan asked. Daniel stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell, this is inappropriate." "Stop," Ethan said. The word landed heavily, drawing attention from nearby tables. Conversations faltered. Chairs shifted. Someone cleared their throat. "What did he say?" Ethan repeated. Annie swallowed. Her voice shook, but she spoke anyway. "He said I should be quiet, that he'd give me candy if I didn't tell." A murmur rippled through the room. Daniel's smile vanished. "This is ridiculous," he said. "She's confused. Someone must have scared her." Ethan looked at him carefully now. At the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept flicking toward the bar, the way his right hand flexed as if itching to move. "You've been asking me to sign documents for months," Ethan said calmly. "Profit-sharing agreements. Retroactive allocations." Daniel exhaled sharply. "That's business, and I've said no," Ethan continued. "Every time." "Yes," Daniel said, his voice tight. "You have. And tonight," Ethan said, "you invited me here to celebrate nothing in particular." Daniel didn't answer. Ethan glanced down at the table, at the wine glass placed carefully within reach, at the second glass already waiting, untouched. He reached out and lifted his own glass, holding it up to the light. Daniel's breath hitched. "Mr. Caldwell," Daniel said quickly, "if this is about trust." Ethan tipped the glass. Red wine spilled onto the white tablecloth, soaking into the fabric like a spreading bruise. A collective gasp rose from the surrounding tables. Daniel stepped back instinctively. "What are you doing?" "Testing something," Ethan replied. He set the empty glass down and tightened his arm around Annie as a server rushed forward, flustered and apologetic. Ethan held up a hand. "Stop," he said. "No one touch anything." The room went quiet. "Security," Ethan said, his voice carrying. "Now." Daniel laughed again, sharp and forced. "This is insane. You're humiliating yourself because of a child's story." Ethan looked down at Annie. "Why did you tell me?" he asked her softly. She thought for a moment, then answered, "Because you said no before." Something in Ethan's chest broke open. Security guards appeared at the edge of the room, uncertainty written across their faces. Ethan met their eyes. "Lock the doors," he said. "No one leaves." Daniel's composure cracked. "You can't do this." "I can," Ethan said. "And I am." One of the guards moved toward Daniel. Another approached the bar. Within minutes, the manager was there, pale and sweating, stammering apologies. "Test the wine," Ethan said. "All of it. Now." The manager nodded frantically and barked orders. A small crowd had gathered now, curiosity and discomfort mingling in equal measure. Daniel backed away slowly. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said. "You're making a mistake." Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Daniel could hear. "You made the mistake the moment you thought a child's silence could be bought." Daniel's eyes flicked to Annie, then away. Minutes stretched. The air felt heavy, charged. Annie remained still, her small body pressed against Ethan's side. He could feel her trembling ease slightly, as if the certainty of action steadied her. A server returned with a somber expression. "Sir," he said quietly, "there's something in the wine." "Not alcohol." Daniel bolted. Two guards grabbed him before he reached the door. He struggled, shouting, but the words blurred into noise. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. He knelt down then, bringing himself level with Annie. "You did the right thing," he said. She looked at him, searching his face. "I was scared." "I know," he replied. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you speak anyway." Annie nodded slowly, as if committing that idea to memory. In the distance, a light flickered once. The restaurant did not return to normal after Daniel Price was dragged away. It couldn't. Something essential had cracked, and everyone in the room felt it, even if they didn't yet understand why. Ethan remained where he was, one arm still wrapped around Annie, his other hand resting on the edge of the table. He could feel the slight tremor in her body now that the immediate danger had passed. Fear, delayed. Children, he knew, were like that. They stayed composed when it mattered, then unraveled once they were safe enough to do so. "Easy," he murmured, angling himself so she could lean into him without being seen by the crowd. "You're okay." Annie nodded, but she didn't loosen her grip. Security moved efficiently, ushering guests back into their seats, speaking in low, controlled voices. The manager hovered nearby, wringing his hands, his face flushed with panic and professional shame. Servers stood frozen, trays clutched to their chests, eyes darting between Ethan, the guards, and the doors. A man in a dark suit approached, older, steady, the kind of person who had spent decades solving problems quietly. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, "I'm head of security for the property. We've secured the exits. Police are on their way." "Good," Ethan replied. "Keep everyone where they are until they arrive." The man hesitated, then glanced at Annie. "Is the child? She stays with me," Ethan said without hesitation. The man nodded and stepped away. Ethan exhaled slowly and looked down at Annie. "What's your mom's name?" he asked. "Marisol," Annie said softly. "Do you know where she is right now?" Annie nodded again. "In the kitchen. She's scared." Ethan felt a sharp ache behind his eyes. He could picture it easily, the mother realizing her child was missing, the rising terror, the helplessness of being trapped behind swinging doors while something went wrong in the dining room. "Let's get her," he said. They moved together, slowly, deliberately, escorted by security. Annie's small hand stayed wrapped in his jacket, as if she were afraid he might disappear if she let go. He didn't pull away. The kitchen fell silent the moment they entered. Marisol stood near the prep counter, her face pale, her hands braced against the metal surface as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. When she saw Annie, her breath caught. "Annie," she whispered, then rushed forward, dropping to her knees and pulling her daughter into a fierce embrace. "Oh my God. I told you to stay back there. I told you." "I know," Annie said, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "I'm sorry." Marisol looked up then, her eyes landing on Ethan. Panic flashed across her face, quickly followed by something harder, fear mixed with expectation. She began apologizing immediately, words tumbling over one another. "I'm so sorry, sir. She shouldn't have bothered you. She's usually very good. I don't know why she did exactly what she should have done," Ethan said. Marisol froze. He knelt down so he was level with both of them. "Your daughter may have saved my life tonight." Marisol stared at him, uncomprehending. "What?" "She heard something dangerous," Ethan continued, "and she chose to speak up, even though it scared her." Marisol looked down at Annie, then back at him. Her eyes filled with tears she had clearly been holding back for years. "She's just a child," Marisol said weakly. "So am I," Ethan replied quietly, "when I remember what it's like to be ignored." The police arrived shortly after. Statements were taken. The wine was confiscated. Daniel Price was escorted out in handcuffs, his protests hollow and frantic. As the story began to take shape, Ethan felt the familiar pull of anger and clarity. The plot was crude in its simplicity, insidious in its execution. He had been targeted not because he was careless, but because he was principled, because he had said no, and because someone believed a child's silence could be purchased. When the officers finally turned to Annie, one of them crouched down, his voice gentle. "Did you see anything you can tell us, sweetheart?" Annie looked at Ethan. He nodded. "You can tell them what you want," he said. "Or you don't have to. It's your choice." She thought for a moment, then spoke. Her words were simple, clear. She told them what she had heard, what she had been promised, and what she had been afraid would happen. No embellishment, no drama. The officer listened carefully, his expression tightening with every sentence. "You did the right thing," he told her when she finished. Annie nodded, as if she had already decided that for herself. Later, when the restaurant had emptied and the lights had been turned down, Ethan stood near the entrance with Marisol and Annie. Marisol clutched her daughter's hand, her knuckles white. "I don't know how to thank you," Marisol said, her voice shaking. "I don't know what would have happened if—" "You don't owe me anything," Ethan said, "but I owe you both." "Well," he reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, handing it to Marisol. "If anyone gives you trouble over tonight," he said, "you call me. Directly." Marisol stared at the card as if it might vanish. "Sir, I mean it," Ethan said. "And Annie?" She looked up at him. "You were very brave," he said. "But bravery shouldn't be punished. It should be protected." Annie studied his face, then nodded solemnly. As they turned to leave, Ethan watched them go, the small figure of the girl framed by her mother's arm. He felt a quiet resolve settle in his chest, heavier than any victory he had ever claimed. Justice, he thought, was not always loud. Sometimes it came in a whisper. Sometimes it came from someone the world was trained not to hear. And sometimes, if you were lucky, you listened in time. The night did not end when the restaurant doors closed. Ethan Caldwell learned that within an hour, he sat in the back seat of his car, jacket folded neatly beside him, hands clasped loosely in his lap as the city slid past the windows in muted streaks of light. His driver kept his eyes forward, saying nothing. The silence was deliberate, respectful. Everyone who worked for Ethan understood when not to speak, but Ethan's mind was loud. He replayed the evening again and again, each detail sharpening with every pass. The way Daniel's voice had tightened when the wine spilled, the way his eyes had darted toward the bar, the practiced calm cracking just enough to reveal desperation underneath. It had not been an act of impulse. It had been planned, carefully, patiently, and at the center of it all was a 6-year-old girl who had refused to stay quiet. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. For 2 years, he had lived with the consequences of a single decision. The night he reported Daniel Price's father, his longtime partner, his friend, he had known exactly what he was doing. He had read the documents twice, then a third time. He had waited a week before making the call, giving himself every chance to justify doing nothing. In the end, he had chosen the truth. The fallout had been brutal. Lawsuits, threats disguised as concern, late-night calls that went silent when he answered. But he had endured it, believing that consequences were the price of integrity. What he had not anticipated was vengeance that would aim so low. When he arrived home, the lights were already on. His security chief, Robert Hayes, was waiting in the study. Jacket off, sleeves rolled up, a tablet lay open on the desk in front of him, its screen filled with reports and timestamps. "They moved faster than I expected," Robert said as Ethan entered. "We've been reviewing footage from the restaurant." Ethan loosened his tie and sat. "Tell me." Robert turned the tablet toward him. Daniel Price coordinated with 3 temporary staff hired through a third-party agency. All falsified credentials. Clean enough not to raise flags unless you were looking for them. "And the drug? Mild neuromuscular inhibitor," Robert said. "Fast-acting, short duration, enough to incapacitate without killing." Ethan exhaled slowly. "He wanted me conscious." "Yes," Robert confirmed, "just not capable of refusing." Ethan's jaw tightened. "There's more," Robert continued. "The papers he planned to force you to sign were predated profit reassignment agreements, backdated transfers tied to shell entities. If you'd signed, even under duress, it would have taken months to untangle. And my reputation," Ethan said quietly, "ruined in the meantime." Robert nodded. "At best." Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had faced hostile takeovers, government inquiries, and public scandal. None of it unsettled him the way this did. "They threatened a child," he said. Robert didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was tight. "Yes." Silence stretched between them. "What about the girl?" Ethan asked finally. "Annie," Robert said. "We looked into her and her mother. Clean. No history. The mother's been working service jobs most of her life. No complaints, no incidents. And now?" Robert hesitated. "There's risk." Ethan's gaze snapped back to him. "Explain." "Daniel Price didn't act alone," Robert said. "He coordinated with people who may not be facing charges tonight. People who won't be happy about how this ended." Ethan stood. "Increase security on them," he said. "Immediately." Robert nodded. "Already done." Ethan paced the room, his steps measured. "I want eyes on every connection Daniel has. Every account. Every associate. I don't want retaliation. I don't want intimidation. And I don't want that child learning that telling the truth comes with consequences." Robert watched him carefully. "You're personally invested." "Yes," Ethan said. "I am." Later that night, long after the house had gone quiet, Ethan sat alone in the study. The city outside his window was calm, indifferent. He turned a small object over in his hands, a paper napkin, folded once, retrieved from the restaurant table before he'd left. He thought of Annie's voice, not loud, not demanding, just certain. 3 times. He reached out and turned off the desk lamp. Darkness filled the room. He turned it back on, then off again, then on, 3 times. Nothing happened. No danger, no alarm, just silence. Ethan leaned back and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he questioned something fundamental. Not the system, not the law, but himself. How many warnings had he ignored because they didn't come from the right person? How many truths had gone unheard because they were spoken too softly? Justice, he realized, did not fail loudly. It failed quietly. It failed when people like him forgot to listen. Across the city, in a small apartment above a laundromat, Annie lay awake in bed. Her mother sat beside her, one hand resting protectively on her back. The room smelled like clean clothes and cheap detergent. "Did I do something bad?" Annie asked softly. Marisol swallowed. "No, baby. I was scared," Annie said. "I know, but I still talked." Marisol kissed her forehead. "That's how I know you did the right thing." Annie nodded, satisfied. Her eyes fluttered closed. In the hallway, the light switch clicked once as Marisol turned it off. Then everything went still. Morning arrived without ceremony. Ethan Caldwell woke before his alarm, the gray light of early dawn filtering through the tall windows of his bedroom. For a moment, he lay still, listening to the quiet hum of a city that had not yet decided what kind of day it would be. Then the memory of the night before surfaced fully, sharp and unavoidable. A child's whisper, a spilled glass of wine, 3 lights. He sat up and rubbed a hand over his face. Sleep had come in fragments, interrupted by half-formed thoughts and images he couldn't quite let go of. This was not how he usually felt after a crisis. Normally, there was a sense of resolution once action had been taken, problems identified, risks contained. This time, there was only a lingering unease. He dressed quickly and went downstairs. The house was quiet, staff moving softly, giving him space. Coffee waited on the kitchen counter, untouched. He poured himself a cup and stood by the window, staring out at the street below. For the first time since the trial 2 years ago, he felt exposed. At 8:30 sharp, Robert Hayes arrived with updates. He set his tablet on the table, his expression grim but controlled. "Daniel Price has been formally charged," Robert said. "Attempted coercion, conspiracy, possession of an illegal substance. He spent the night in custody." "And his associates?" Ethan asked. "2 are cooperating," Robert replied. "1 is still claiming ignorance. That won't last." Ethan nodded. "Good. There's something else," Robert said carefully. "Media inquiries are starting. Words leaking. People noticed the police presence. Someone talked. Ethan expected that. Keep my name out of it as much as possible." Robert hesitated. "That may be difficult. There's interest in why the situation was stopped before it escalated." "Aid." Ethan took a sip of coffee, then set the mug down untouched. "Then tell them the truth." Robert raised an eyebrow. "A child overheard something and spoke up," Ethan continued. "That's all. That's not the version they'll want," Robert said. "I don't care what they want," Ethan replied. "I care about what happened." Robert studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Understood." After Robert left, Ethan remained seated, staring at the empty chair across from him. He thought of Annie again, of the way she had stood her ground even when threatened, even when bribed. He had built an empire on the belief that integrity mattered, and yet it had taken a 6-year-old to remind him what integrity actually looked like when the stakes were real. He reached for his phone. Marisol answered on the second ring, her voice cautious. "Hello, Miss Alvarez," Ethan said. "This is Ethan Caldwell. We met last night." There was a pause. "Yes," she said slowly. "Is something wrong?" "No," Ethan replied. "I wanted to check on you and Annie. See how you're doing." Another pause, longer this time. "She's at school," Marisol said. She didn't want to miss it. Ethan felt a faint smile tug at his mouth. Of course she didn't. "She's okay," Marisol continued. "Tired, but okay. I'm glad," Ethan said. "Listen, I wanted to make something clear. What Annie did last night, there will be no negative consequences for either of you." "Did," Marisol exhaled shakily. Thank you. I was worried. I've seen how these things go. I know, Ethan said. That's why I'm calling. He hesitated, then added, I'd like to meet. With you and Annie. Somewhere neutral. Just to talk. Marisol was quiet. When she spoke again, her voice held a mix of suspicion and resolve. Why? Because I want Annie to know that telling the truth didn't end when the police left, Ethan said. And because I owe her more than a thank you. There was a long silence on the other end. All right, Marisol said finally. But nothing fancy. She doesn't like places where people stare. Ethan nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Understood. After the call ended, Ethan sat back and considered how strange it was that the most important meeting he had scheduled that week was not with investors or attorneys, but with a first grader and her mother. Across town, Annie sat at her desk, her feet not quite touching the floor. The classroom buzzed with low chatter as students settled in. Her teacher moved around the room, collecting homework and offering gentle reminders. Annie stared at the corner of her desk, where someone had scratched a heart into the wood years ago. She traced the outline with her finger. Over and over. A boy across the aisle leaned toward her. Why were cops at the restaurant last night? He whispered. Annie shrugged. I don't know. It wasn't a lie. Not really. She didn't know everything. She just knew what she had heard and what she had done. At recess, she sat on a bench instead of running with the others. She watched the teachers, the doors, the way people moved when they thought no one was paying attention. She felt older than she had a week ago. Heavier, somehow. When the bell rang and the day ended, Marisol was waiting for her at the gate. Worry etched into her face. Annie ran to her and wrapped her arms around her waist. Did I do good? Annie asked quietly. Marisol knelt and held her face gently between her hands. You did the best thing you could have done, she said. And that matters. Annie nodded. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Annie stood in her bedroom and reached for the light switch. She paused, her fingers hovering. She turned it off, then on, then off again, 3 times. Nothing bad happened. Down the street, Ethan Caldwell stood by his own window, watching the last of the daylight fade. He thought of how close he had come to not hearing a warning that mattered, of how easily the world dismissed small voices. He made a quiet promise to himself then. He would not forget. The cafe Marisol chose was the kind of place Ethan Caldwell would never have found on his own. It sat on a quiet side street between a dry cleaner and a small dental office. Its windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. No valet. No reservations. Just a hand-painted sign in the window advertising coffee, grilled cheese, and soup of the day. When Ethan arrived, he paused outside longer than necessary, adjusting his jacket, reminding himself that he was not here to negotiate or command anything. He was here to listen. Inside, the room smelled like toasted bread and cinnamon. Annie sat at a small table near the back, her feet swinging gently beneath the chair. Marisol sat across from her, a paper cup of coffee cradled in both hands. When Annie saw Ethan, her eyes widened, then softened with recognition. That's him, she said quietly. Marisol turned and stood immediately. Mr. Caldwell. Please, Ethan said, holding up a hand. Ethan, she nodded, cautious but polite. Thank you for meeting us. Thank you for agreeing, he replied. He pulled out a chair and sat, deliberately choosing the smaller one meant for tight spaces rather than the more comfortable seat nearby. Annie watched this with interest. You don't like big chairs, she observed. Ethan smiled faintly. They make it easy to forget where you are. Annie seemed to consider that. My teacher says that too, she said, though it wasn't clear if that was true. A waitress approached, cheerful and unhurried. Ethan ordered coffee. Annie ordered hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, then glanced at her mother as if checking for approval. Marisol nodded. For a moment, none of them spoke. Ethan broke the silence gently. How are you feeling today? Annie shrugged. Okay. That's a big word, he said. What does it mean today? She tilted her head. It means I'm not scared right now. Marisol's hand tightened slightly around her cup. I'm glad, Ethan said. And if that changes, It's okay to say so. Annie studied him, then nodded once. I wanted to explain something, Ethan continued. About what happened. About what happens next. Marisol straightened. Is she in danger? No, Ethan said immediately. And I intend to keep it that way. Etta Nighty. She watched his face carefully. I've worked long enough to know intentions don't always matter. That's fair, Ethan replied. What matters is action. He turned his attention to Annie. Do you remember the man who talked to you in the kitchen? Annie's fingers curled around the edge of the table. Yes. He won't be coming near you again, Ethan said. Or your mom. Ever? Annie asked. Ever. He confirmed. She nodded, satisfied. But there's something else, Ethan said. What you did, people might talk about it. Not always kindly. Marisol's jaw tightened. That's what I was afraid of. I won't allow her to be used as a story, Ethan continued. No names, no photos, no interviews. That part is not up for debate. Marisol's shoulders eased slightly. Thank you. Annie frowned. What's a story? Ethan considered how to answer. It's when adults turn something important into something loud. She thought about that, then said, I don't like loud things. It's not free. I don't either, he admitted. The hot chocolate arrived, steam rising as Annie stirred it slowly, watching the marshmallows melt. She seemed calmer now, grounded by the simple ritual. Can I ask you something? Annie said suddenly. Of course, Ethan replied. Why didn't you drink the wine? She asked. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. Because someone brave warned me, she nodded, as if that were obvious. My mom says grown-ups don't always listen. She's right, Ethan said. We don't. Marisol looked at him sharply. Then why did you? He took a breath. Because I've learned the cost of not listening. And because fear, when it's real, sounds different. Annie sipped her drink. You looked scared, she said matter-of-factly. Ethan laughed softly. I was. She seemed pleased by his honesty. They talked for a while after that. About school, about the way Annie liked to line up her crayons by color, about how Marisol worked double shifts and still made time to read before bed. Ethan listened more than he spoke. At one point, Annie slid off her chair and walked over to the light switch near the restroom. She looked back at Ethan. I won't do it now, she said. Just checking. He nodded. That's okay. When it was time to leave, Ethan stood and reached into his pocket, then stopped himself. He didn't offer money. He didn't offer solutions wrapped in contracts. Instead, he said, if there's ever a moment when you feel unsure, when something doesn't feel right, you call me. He handed Marisol a card, a different one this time. No title, just a number. Marisol accepted it slowly. I hope we never need it. So do I, Ethan said. Outside, Annie tugged on his sleeve. You listened, she said. Yes, he replied. She nodded once, firmly. Good. As they walked away, Ethan remained where he was, watching them disappear down the street. He felt no triumph, no sense of victory, only responsibility. That night, back in his quiet house, Ethan stood in the darkened study and reached for the lamp. He turned it off, on, off again, 3 times. He didn't move. He listened. The first sign that the night at the restaurant was not finished came 3 days later. Ethan Caldwell noticed it in a place most people would have dismissed as coincidence. A document crossed his desk mid-morning, buried among routine approvals. Vendor restructuring, minor equity adjustments, language so clean it almost sang. He read it once, then again, slower the second time. The numbers didn't scream, they whispered. And whispers, he had learned, were more dangerous. He pushed the paper aside and leaned back in his chair. 2 years ago, when he had exposed Daniel Price's father, it had been because of documents just like this, transactions designed to look harmless unless you understood the rhythm of money. That rhythm had never left him. If anything, it had grown sharper. Robert, he said into the intercom, I need a full audit on anything Daniel Price touched, directly or indirectly. Go back 3 years. There was a pause. That's extensive, Robert replied. So was his patience, Ethan said. And he didn't build that overnight. He stood and walked to the window. Down below, the city moved on, unaware. People hurried to meetings, crossed streets, bought coffee. None of them knew how close one man had come to losing his autonomy over a glass of wine. None of them knew a child had stopped it. Annie. The thought of her surfaced uninvited, as it had been doing more often lately, not as fear, as memory. The steadiness in her eyes when she said, 3 times. The way she had looked relieved not when Daniel was arrested, but when Ethan believed her. Belief, he realized, was a form of protection. Across town, Annie sat cross-legged on the living room floor, crayons spread out like fallen leaves. She was drawing a building. Tall, straight lines, many windows. At the top, she added a small square with light spilling out. "What's that?" Marisol asked, folding laundry nearby. "My thinking place," Annie said without looking up. Marisol smiled faintly. "You have a lot of those lately." Annie shrugged. "Thinking keeps bad things from sneaking up." Marisol paused. She wanted to argue, to tell her daughter that it wasn't her job to be vigilant, that childhood was supposed to be lighter than this. But the words felt dishonest. Annie had seen something, done something. You couldn't ask her to forget it. The phone rang. Marisol froze. She exchanged a look with Annie before answering. "Hello? Miss Alvarez," a man's voice said. "This is Detective Harris. We spoke briefly the other night." Marisol's shoulders tensed. "Yes, I wanted to let you know," he continued, "that the case is expanding. There may be additional inquiries. Nothing that involves Annie directly." Marisol closed her eyes briefly. But if anything unusual happens, calls, visits, questions, you contact us immediately," he said. "And Mr. Caldwell." Annie looked up, her crayon hovering midair. "Is someone in trouble?" she asked. Marisol forced a smile. "No, baby." But Annie watched her mother carefully, the way she watched everything now. That evening, Ethan sat with Robert and the legal team. Documents spread across the table. What had begun as a single act of revenge was revealing itself as something more elaborate. Shell companies, deferred liabilities, a network designed to activate only if Daniel succeeded. He was planning for failure. Robert said quietly. "Yes," Ethan agreed, "and success, which means others are involved," one of the attorneys added. Ethan nodded. "And they're still out there." The room fell silent. For the first time since the restaurant, Ethan felt something close to fear, not for himself, but for the people caught at the edges of this. The ones without security details or legal teams, the ones who spoke up and paid the price. Later that night, Ethan stood alone in his kitchen, staring at the light switch. He hadn't meant to. It had simply become a habit, a ritual. He flipped it once, off, on, off again, 3 times. He waited. Nothing happened. No warning, no voice. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. He exhaled slowly. At the same moment, Annie lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The hallway light spilled softly under her door. She listened to her mother moving around the apartment, the familiar sounds grounding her. She whispered into the dark, barely audible. "If something feels wrong, don't wait." She didn't know who she was saying it to. Maybe herself, maybe the world. Somewhere between those two spaces, danger shifted. And both of them, the man who had almost lost everything and the child who had almost been ignored, felt it without knowing why. The first threat did not arrive as a threat. It arrived as kindness. Marisol noticed it on a Thursday afternoon when she returned from work earlier than expected. A small paper bag sat neatly outside her apartment door, folded at the top, her name written in careful block letters. Inside was a loaf of bread still warm, a container of soup, and a handwritten note. "For Annie. Hope she's doing well." Marisol's stomach tightened. She stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening. The building was quiet in the way it always was at that hour, too quiet. No footsteps, no voices, just the distant rattle of pipes and the hum of the vending machine on the first floor. She did not bring the bag inside. She closed the door, locked it, and called Ethan. He answered on the first ring. "Miss Alvarez, there's something outside my apartment," she said. Her voice was steady, but only because she was holding it that way. "What is it?" he asked. "Food. A note. No name." "Did you touch it?" No. Good, Ethan said. Stay inside. Don't open the door again. I'm sending someone. Marisol's hand shook slightly as she hung up. Annie watched from the couch, knees tucked to her chest. Is it bad? She asked. Marisol forced herself to kneel in front of her daughter. It might be nothing, she said carefully. But we're going to be cautious. Annie nodded. She didn't ask about the bag again. Less than 15 minutes later, a knock sounded firm, controlled. Marisol looked through the peephole and saw a woman in a dark jacket, badge visible, posture relaxed but alert. Miss Alvarez, the woman said through the door. I'm with Mr. Caldwell's security team. Marisol opened the door only as wide as necessary. The woman glanced at the bag, then back at Marisol. You did the right thing calling. She took the bag away without ceremony, her movements efficient, practiced. You're not in immediate danger, she added, but someone wanted to see how you'd react. Marisol's breath caught. Who? We don't know yet, the woman replied. But they're not subtle. Annie stood behind her mother, peeking around her side. Did they want to scare us? She asked. The woman crouched slightly to meet her gaze. They wanted to see if you were paying attention. Annie nodded. We were. That night, Ethan reviewed the incident in silence, hands clasped behind his back as he stared at the city from his office window. The report lay untouched on his desk. He didn't need to read it to know what it said. Pressure, test boundaries, escalation. They're probing, Robert said from behind him, seeing if fear works where force failed. Ethan turned. It won't. Robert studied his face. They're not aiming at you. I know, Ethan said. That's what makes it unforgivable. He picked up his phone and dialed Marisol's number again. I want you and Annie somewhere safer for a while, he said when she answered. Not hidden. Just supported. Marisol hesitated. I don't want her to feel like she did something wrong. She didn't, Ethan said. And she won't. I promise. After the call ended, Ethan sat alone, the weight of responsibility settling heavier than any financial risk he had ever taken. He had entered this world believing that justice was enforced through systems, courts, contracts, consequences. Now he understood something else. Justice also lived in protection, in preventing harm before it arrived, in refusing to let the vulnerable pay the price for the powerful. Across town, Annie lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The hallway light was on again, brighter than usual. She listened to her mother, moving quietly, packing a small bag. Are we going somewhere? Annie asked. Yes, Marisol said gently, just for a little while. Annie considered this. Is it because I talked? Marisol stopped. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, brushing Annie's hair back from her face. No, she said firmly. It's because you mattered. Annie thought about that. I like that, she said. Later, as Marisol turned off the light, Annie spoke again. If the light goes off 3 times, she said sleepily, we leave. Marisol swallowed hard. Yes, baby. The light clicked off. On. Off again. 3 times. And this time, they were ready. They did not call it hiding. Ethan was careful about that. When Marisol and Annie arrived at the house just outside the city, the one tucked behind a line of old trees and facing a quiet stretch of water, Ethan met them himself. No black SUVs lined the drive. No visible guards. Just a modest-looking place that felt deliberately ordinary. This is temporary, he said as he opened the door. And it's your choice. Every day you're here. Marisol nodded, holding Annie's hand tightly. We understand. Annie stepped inside and immediately noticed the smell. Wood polish. Soap. Something warm. Like bread. She looked around, taking in the living room with its soft couch, the bookshelf filled with uneven rows, the light pouring in through wide windows. It's quiet, she said. Yes, Ethan replied. That's why I like it. Annie walked to the window and pressed her forehead lightly against the glass. You can see when people come, she observed. Ethan smiled. You're very observant. She didn't smile back. You have to be. That night, Marisol slept poorly. The unfamiliar bed, the silence, the knowledge that someone, somewhere, had left food outside her door not to help but to test her fear. She lay awake listening to the house settle, to Annie's steady breathing in the next room, and wondered how close she had come to losing something she could never replace. Ethan did not sleep at all. He sat at the dining table long after the lights were off, papers spread before him, untouched. The investigation had accelerated. Daniel Price had started talking carefully, selectively, but enough to confirm what Ethan already suspected. This was not just about revenge. It was about leverage. About forcing a man known for refusing to bend into breaking publicly. And when that failed, they had gone after the smallest, quietest target available. A child. His phone vibrated softly. Robert's name flashed on the screen. "We confirmed it," Robert said without preamble. The food delivery wasn't random. It was meant to be seen. Psychological pressure. "Who authorized it?" Ethan asked. "Not Daniel directly," Robert replied. "Someone higher up. Someone who hasn't surfaced yet." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Then they're watching." "Yes," Robert said. "And they're waiting." Ethan looked toward the hallway where Annie's room was. A small lamp cast a warm glow under her door. He thought of how easily the world justified harm by calling it collateral, by calling it necessary. "Then we don't wait," Ethan said. "We protect, and we expose." The next morning, Annie woke early. She padded down the hallway in her socks, careful not to make noise, and found Ethan in the kitchen pouring coffee. "You don't sleep much," she said. He glanced over, surprised. "Neither do you." With 31, she climbed onto a chair and rested her chin on the table. "Sleeping is for when things are calm." Ethan considered that. "Then I suppose we'll work on making things calm." Annie watched him closely. "Are you scared?" He didn't answer right away. Then, honestly, yes. She nodded. "That's okay. My mom says brave people are scared too." "She's a wise woman," Ethan said. Annie swung her legs. "Are you going to make them stop?" "Yes," he said. "How?" Ethan met her eyes. "By not pretending this is smaller than it is." Later that day, Marisol joined them in the kitchen. She hesitated before speaking, then said, "I don't want Annie growing up thinking the world is always dangerous." Ethan nodded. "Neither do I. But I also don't want her learning that telling the truth means running away," Marisol continued. "It doesn't," Ethan said firmly. "It means changing the rules so the truth isn't punished." He paused. "If you're willing, I want to make this public. Not Annie, not you. But the pattern, the way intimidation works, the way silence is bought." Marisol studied him. "And what happens to us? You stay protected," Ethan said. "And you decide when you're ready to step back into your life." Annie looked between them. "I don't want people to think my mom did something wrong," she said. "They won't," Ethan replied. "They'll know she raised someone who spoke up." Annie seemed to think that over. Then she nodded once. "Okay," Midasley. That evening, Ethan stood in his study as the sun dipped below the trees. He recorded a statement, not emotional, not dramatic, just facts, dates, decisions, consequences. He spoke about corruption, about retaliation, about how easily power targeted those without it. He did not mention Annie by name. He mentioned a child who heard something wrong and refused to stay quiet. When he finished, he sat back, suddenly exhausted. In the guest room, Annie lay on her stomach, coloring. She had drawn a house with many windows again. This time, there were people inside. All different sizes. She added a small switch on the wall, 3 tiny lines next to it. Down the hall, Marisol watched her daughter and felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not fear, not anger, but resolve. The light outside flickered as evening settled in. Somewhere, someone would see Ethan's words and understand that the game had changed. And somewhere else, someone would realize that silence was no longer guaranteed. The statement went live at exactly 7:45 the next morning. Ethan Caldwell did not watch it. He stood in the kitchen of the quiet house, hands wrapped around a mug he had already forgotten to drink from, listening instead to the low murmur of the radio Marisol had turned on. She kept the volume just high enough to hear the cadence of the anchor's voice, not the speculation that followed. A rare public address from billionaire Ethan Caldwell early this morning, alleging an attempted coercion scheme tied to internal corruption and retaliation. Marisol switched it off. "That's enough," she said. Ethan nodded. He appreciated the restraint. The words were out there now. Whether they were twisted, analyzed, or ignored was no longer something he could control. Control, he was learning, had limits. Annie sat at the table drawing, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. She had drawn a group of people standing in a line, all holding hands. One of them was much smaller than the others, but she had drawn that figure in the middle, not at the edge. "What are they doing?" Ethan asked gently. Annie didn't look up. "Waiting. For what?" She shrugged. "For someone to listen." Ethan felt the familiar tightening in his chest. By noon, the calls started. Board members, legal advisors, old acquaintances who had not spoken to him in years but suddenly remembered his number. Some were supportive, some were cautious. A few were openly angry. "You're inviting scrutiny," one voice warned. "Yes," Ethan replied calmly. "That's the point." Robert arrived shortly after lunch, his expression sharper than usual. "The reaction is significant," he said. "You struck a nerve." "Good," Ethan replied. "Nerves exist for a reason." Daniel Price has been moved," Robert continued. "Protective custody." Ethan's jaw tightened. "From whom?" "From people who don't appreciate him failing," Robert said. "Or talking." Ethan exhaled slowly. "And the person behind the intimidation?" "We're close," Robert said. "But there's something you should know." He hesitated, then continued. "Someone attempted to access school records. Annie's." Marisol stiffened immediately. "What?" "Not successfully," Robert added quickly. "We intercepted it, but it wasn't random." Annie looked up from her drawing. "Am I in trouble?" she asked. Ethan crouched beside her chair, bringing himself level with her. "No," he said firmly. "Someone tried to look where they weren't allowed. That's their mistake, not yours." She studied his face. "Are you mad?" "No," he said. "I'm careful." That seemed to satisfy her. She went back to coloring. Marisol's hands trembled slightly as she folded them together. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." Ethan met her gaze. "And it's exactly why we don't stop now." She swallowed. "I don't want her to grow up thinking she has to be on guard all the time." "I don't want that either," Ethan said. "Which is why this ends with accountability, not silence." That afternoon, Ethan took Annie for a walk along the path near the water. The air was cool, the sky heavy with clouds that hadn't yet decided to break. They walked slowly, side by side, neither speaking for a while. "Do you ever wish you hadn't said anything?" Annie asked suddenly. Ethan stopped. He considered the question carefully. "About a lot of things," he said. "Yes," she nodded. "Me too." They resumed walking, but, Ethan continued, "I've learned that wishing doesn't change what's right. It only changes how long you carry the weight." Annie kicked a small stone into the water and watched the ripples spread. "It feels heavy sometimes," she said. "Yes," Ethan agreed. "It does." They reached a bench overlooking the water and sat. Ducks drifted lazily near the shore, oblivious. "My dad used to say something," Ethan said after a moment. "He said the hardest part of doing the right thing isn't the cost, it's the waiting afterward, waiting to see if it mattered." "Did it?" Annie asked. He smiled faintly. "I think it did. Just not always in ways he could see." She thought about that. "I think it matters when someone remembers." Ethan looked at her, surprised. She shrugged. "Like you remembered to listen?" That evening, as the house settled into quiet again, Marisol tucked Annie into bed. The little girl clutched her favorite stuffed animal and yawned. "Mom?" she asked. "Yes, baby? If something bad happens because I talked, will it stop happening to other kids?" Marisol's breath caught. She smoothed Annie's hair gently. "I believe it will," she said. "Because people saw you." Annie nodded, eyes drifting closed. "Okay." Down the hall, Ethan stood in the doorway, listening. Later, alone in the study, he reviewed the latest updates. Pressure was building. The narrative was shifting. People were asking questions they had avoided for years. He reached for the lamp. Off, on, off again, 3 times. This time, his phone buzzed. A single message from Robert. "We have a name." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the moment settle fully. The warning had been heard. Now came the reckoning. The name arrived without ceremony. Ethan read it once, then again, slower the second time, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something less heavy. They didn't. Caleb Mercer. The surname settled in his chest like a stone. Not unfamiliar. Not powerful on the surface. The kind of name that hid behind other names, that never appeared on letterhead but was always copied quietly on emails no one printed. Robert stood across from him, arms crossed. "He's not flashy," he said. "That's why he's lasted." Ethan set the phone down. "What's his connection?" "Indirect," Robert replied. "He financed Daniel Price's father years ago. Silent partner. When you exposed the fraud, Mercer lost a pipeline. Not enough to destroy him, enough to make him patient." "And children?" Ethan asked quietly. Robert's jaw tightened. "Not a line he's crossed before. Which tells me he didn't think of it as crossing a line. He thought of it as leverage." Ethan looked toward the hallway, toward the room where Annie slept. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound matter. "We end this cleanly," Ethan said. "No spectacle, no bargaining." Robert nodded. Already moving. By morning, the story had shifted again. Not headlines, those lagged behind truth, but the undercurrent. Whispers turned into questions. Questions into scrutiny. Mercer's name surfaced in places it had never appeared before. Financial journals, ethics committees, a subpoena quietly issued and just as quietly noticed by the people who mattered. At breakfast, Marisol watched Ethan read the news on his tablet. She didn't ask questions. She had learned when silence was protective and when it was dangerous. This silence felt like waiting for a storm to decide where to land. Annie, meanwhile, was focused on her cereal. "Is today a listening day?" she asked suddenly. Ethan looked up. "What do you mean?" She gestured vaguely with her spoon. "Some days are loud. Some days you listen instead." Ethan considered that. "Yes," he said. "Today is a listening day." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her bowl. Later, Robert pulled Ethan aside. "Mercer's people are reacting," he said. "Not aggressively. Yet, he's testing how far this goes." "And you?" Ethan asked. "I'm making sure he understands exactly how far," Robert replied. That afternoon, Annie sat at the kitchen table coloring while Marisol folded laundry. She drew a circle this time. Inside it, small figures stood close together. Outside the circle, she drew nothing. "What's that?" Marisol asked gently. "A safe," Annie said. "Like a safe place?" Annie shook her head. "Like a promise." Marisol's throat tightened. "Who promised?" She shrugged. "He did." "And you did." Marisol crossed the room and knelt beside her. "We'll keep it," she said. Annie smiled, then returned to her drawing. As evening approached, the air grew heavy, clouds pressing low against the trees. Ethan stood on the back porch, watching the sky darken. He felt the familiar pull of anticipation the moment before consequences arrived. His phone rang. "Mr. Caldwell," a voice said, smooth and unhurried. "Caleb Mercer." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "You're calling to save time," he said. "Not to apologize." A faint chuckle. "I'm calling because I respect efficiency." "You threatened a child," Ethan replied. A pause. "I tested a response," Mercer said. "Children are observant, useful." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "You miscalculated." "Yes," Mercer said calmly. "I did." Another pause, heavier this time. "What do you want?" Mercer asked. "I want you gone," Ethan said. "From my company, from my orbit. From the lives you thought were expendable." "That's not how this works," Mercer replied. "It is now," Ethan said. "You've already lost. You just haven't felt it yet." Silence stretched. "You're changing the rules," Mercer said finally. "No," Ethan replied. "I'm enforcing them." The line went dead. Inside, Annie flipped the light switch in the hallway off, then on, then off again. 3 times. Not out of fear, out of habit. Ethan watched from the doorway. Nothing happened. No knock, no call, no sudden danger, just quiet. That night, as Marisol tucked Annie into bed, The girl asked softly. Is the bad man listening? Marisol brushed her hair back. Annie yawned. Then he'll know when to stop. Down the hall, Ethan sat alone, the weight finally beginning to lift, not because the danger was gone, but because it had been named. Justice, he thought, did not arrive all at once. It arrived in layers, in exposure, in accountability. In the refusal to look away, he reached for the lamp one last time that night. Off, on, off again, 3 times. Stillness held. The reckoning did not arrive with sirens. It came with paperwork. Ethan Caldwell had always believed that true power revealed itself in the unremarkable moments in quiet offices, in unsigned memos, in meetings that ended without raised voices. Caleb Mercer's downfall began that way, through a sequence of actions so procedural they looked almost polite. By the end of the week, 3 of Mercer's holding companies were under formal review. Not frozen, not rated, reviewed. Regulators asked questions they had never bothered to ask before. Banks delayed approvals. Partners stopped returning calls. Mercer's world did not collapse. It narrowed. Ethan watched it happen from a distance, refusing the temptation to rush it. He understood something Mercer had forgotten. Panic created mistakes, but patience exposed patterns. Robert delivered updates each morning, his reports precise, almost clinical. He's liquidating, he said one day. Not fleeing. Preparing. Oh, preparing for what? Ethan asked. Negotiation, Robert replied. Or leverage. Ethan nodded. He won't get either. At the house, life continued in small, careful routines. Annie helped Marisol bake cornbread one afternoon, her small hands dusted with flour. She hummed as she worked, an off-key melody she made up as she went along. The sound filled the kitchen with something that felt like normal. Do you think we'll go home soon? Annie asked. Marisol hesitated. I think we'll go somewhere safe, she said. And then home will come after. Annie accepted that. She had learned that answers didn't always arrive in the order you wanted. That evening, Ethan found Annie on the porch, sitting cross-legged with her back against the railing. The sky was streaked with orange and purple, the kind of sunset that made people stop without knowing why. You look busy, he said. I'm counting, Annie replied. Counting what? How long it stays quiet, she said. Ethan sat beside her. And, she shrugged. It's doing pretty good today. He smiled faintly. Quiet can be a sign of progress, or hiding, Annie said. He studied her, struck again by the clarity with which she saw the world. You're right, he said. That's why we watch both. The next morning, the call came. Mercer did not speak this time. His lawyer did. Mr. Caldwell, the man said smoothly, my client would like to discuss terms. There are none, Ethan replied. He believes there's room for mutual discretion. There was, Ethan said, before a child was threatened. A pause. You're leaving value on the table. No, Ethan said. I'm removing poison from the room. The call ended without ceremony. That afternoon, a car appeared at the end of the long driveway. It did not approach the house. It simply idled, far enough away to pretend coincidence. Security noticed immediately. Ethan noticed when Annie did. There's a watcher, she said quietly, standing at the window. Yes, Ethan replied. Is it him? Not directly, Ethan said. But it's meant to be seen. Annie frowned. That means he's scared. Ethan looked at her, surprised. Why do you say that? Because brave people don't need to remind you they're there, she said. The car left 10 minutes later. That night, Robert confirmed what Ethan already suspected. Mercer's isolating, losing allies. The watcher was a message, not a threat. And our response? Ethan asked. Robert smiled thinly. We didn't give him one. Ethan nodded. Silence, when chosen, could be louder than any warning. Later, after Annie had gone to bed, Marisol sat with Ethan at the kitchen table. She wrapped her hands around a mug she hadn't touched. I keep thinking about something, she said. What's that? If Annie hadn't spoken up, if you hadn't listened, this would have gone very differently. I see. Yes, Ethan agreed. She swallowed. I don't know how to teach her to live in a world like that without making her afraid of everyone. Ethan considered this carefully. You don't teach her the world is dangerous, he said. You teach her that her voice matters, and that when it does, someone will answer. Marisol nodded slowly. That's what I want her to remember. The next day brought the final turn. Caleb Mercer resigned from every board he sat on. Quietly. No statement. No apology. Within hours, the subpoena expanded. Not because of Ethan's influence, but because others, sensing weakness, began to speak. The system, flawed and slow, finally did what it was meant to do. Ethan watched the news report without satisfaction. Only resolve. That evening, Annie stood in the hallway and flipped the light switch. Off, on, off again, 3 times. She waited. Nothing happened. She smiled. Looks like it worked, she said. Ethan crouched beside her. What did? Listening, she replied. He nodded. Yes, he said. It did. Caleb Mercer did not disappear. He diminished. Ethan Caldwell understood the difference, and it mattered. Disappearance created legends. Diminishment created lessons. The weeks that followed Mercer's resignation unfolded with a quiet inevitability. Investigations widened. Former partners distanced themselves with practiced concern. Accounts were audited, then audited again. No one rushed. No one needed to. Momentum, once shifted, carried its own weight. Ethan stayed out of sight. He did not give interviews. He did not comment publicly. His silence was not strategic now. It was deliberate. He had said what needed to be said. Anything more would turn the story into something else, something louder and less true. At the house, life softened. Not immediately, but enough. Marisol resumed cooking meals that took longer than necessary, recipes she remembered from her own childhood. Annie helped when she could, stirring slowly, tasting carefully, learning the patience of waiting for something to be ready. The kitchen became a place where time stretched, instead of pressed. One afternoon, Annie asked, "Are we still being watched?" Marisol paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. "Why do you ask?" "Because it feels different," Annie said. "Like when a room is empty but you still hear echoes." Marisol looked at Ethan, who was standing by the window. "That's a good way to put it," he said. "No one's watching you anymore. But it takes time for your body to believe that." Annie nodded. "My teacher says feelings are slower than facts." "She sounds smart," Ethan said. "She is," Annie replied. "She listens." That word again, listening. It had become the quiet axis around which everything turned. Later that day, Ethan received a call from Robert. The tone was lighter than it had been in weeks. "It's done," Robert said. "Mercer's reached a point of no return. Even if the courts take their time, his influence is finished." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Good. There's something else," Robert added. "The school district approved the privacy protections you requested. No records accessed without oversight. No informal inquiries." "Thank you," Ethan said. "That matters." After the call, Ethan sat alone for a long time. He thought of how close this had come to going unnoticed, of how easy it would have been to dismiss a child's warning as confusion, imagination, inconvenience. Power, he realized, was not measured by what you could ignore. It was measured by what you refused to. That evening, Annie found him in the living room, sitting on the floor with his back against the couch. He was sorting through a box of old photographs he had brought with him from the city. "What are those?" she asked, plopping down beside him. "Pieces of my life," he said. From before I understood some things, she picked one up carefully. A younger Ethan stood beside an older man, both of them stiff and uncomfortable, neither smiling. "Is that your dad?" she asked. "Yes, he looks serious," Annie said. "He was," Ethan replied. "But he listened. Not always well, not always fast, but he tried." Annie studied the photo. Did he believe kids? Ethan considered the question longer than she expected. "I think he learned to," he said finally. She nodded, satisfied. "Can I keep one?" she asked. "Which one?" She pointed to a photo near the bottom of the box. It showed Ethan standing alone outside a courthouse, younger, tense, defiant. "This one," Annie said. "You look like you're about to do something hard." Ethan smiled faintly. "That was a hard day." "Then you should remember it," she said. so you don't forget how to be brave." He handed it to her without hesitation. That night, Marisol sat on the edge of Annie's bed, brushing her hair as she always did. The routine had returned, gentle and familiar. "Are we going back to the apartment?" Annie asked. "Soon," Marisol said. "But not because we're running, because we're choosing." Annie thought about that. "I like choosing." "So do I," Marisol said. Down the hall, Ethan stood in the doorway, listening to the low cadence of a mother's voice and a child's quiet questions. He felt something settle inside him, not relief, exactly, but alignment, the sense that events had landed where they were meant to, not cleanly, not easily, but honestly. Later, alone in the study, Ethan turned off the lamp. On, off again, 3 times. He waited. Nothing stirred. For the first time since that night at the restaurant, the silence did not feel like anticipation. It felt like rest. Going back did not feel like returning. It felt like crossing a line deliberately. Eyes open. The apartment looked smaller than Marisol remembered. The ceiling lower, the hallway narrower. Even the familiar smell of detergent and old paint felt different, like something she had outgrown without meaning to. Annie stood just inside the door, her backpack still on, surveying the space with quiet seriousness. "It didn't change," Annie said. "No," Marisol replied. "We did. With her 1-2. Ethan had insisted on walking them to the door but not inside. He stood in the hallway, hands in his coat pockets, giving them space that was clearly intentional. "This is where I stop," he said. Annie looked up at him. "You don't live here." "No," he said. "But you do." She nodded, satisfied by the answer. Marisol hesitated, then said, "You don't have to keep checking on us." Ethan met her gaze. "I know, but you will," she added. "Yes," he agreed. Annie stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist without warning. It was brief, firm, and unceremonious. When she stepped back, she looked up at him as if daring him to misunderstand it. "You listened," she said. "That means you stay." Ethan swallowed. "I will." After he left, Marisol locked the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt earned, not imposed. That night, Annie slept with the light off for the first time in weeks. No flicking, no counting, just sleep. For Ethan, the return to routine was harder. The city welcomed him back without comment. Meetings resumed, decisions waited. The world assumed continuity, as it always did, but something in him had shifted. And he felt it most sharply in rooms where people spoke loudly and listened poorly. During a board meeting, a junior analyst hesitated mid-sentence, visibly nervous. The room waited, impatient. Ethan raised a hand. "Let him finish." Good no." The analyst looked up, startled, then continued. "The idea was imperfect, incomplete, but it was honest." Ethan nodded. "That's worth exploring." Afterward, Robert noticed. "You're changing how you run things." "Yes," Ethan said. "I'm paying attention." The first letter arrived 2 weeks later. Not a threat, not an apology, just a message, unsigned, delivered through a legal intermediary. Caleb Mercer had agreed to full cooperation. Ethan read it once and set it aside. The outcome mattered less than the process. The system was moving, slowly and imperfectly, but it was moving. Across town, Annie stood in front of her class for show and tell. She held up a drawing, a simple one, a room with a light switch and people inside, standing close together. "This is about listening," she said. The teacher smiled encouragingly. "Can you tell us more?" Annie nodded. "If someone hears something wrong, they should say it. Even if they're small." A few kids nodded. One raised a hand. "What if no one listens?" Annie thought about that. Then she said, "Then you keep talking until someone does." The room was quiet for a moment longer than usual. At home that evening, Marisol found Annie drawing again. "What are you making?" she asked. "A rule," Annie replied. "What rule?" Annie wrote carefully at the bottom of the page, letters uneven but determined. "Quiet doesn't mean safe." Marisol felt her throat tighten. Later that night, Ethan sat alone in his apartment. Lights low, city humming beyond the glass. He had not flicked the switch in days. The habit had faded, replaced by something steadier. He thought of Annie's words, "Keep talking until someone listens." Power, he understood now, was not the ability to silence risk. It was the responsibility to answer it. His phone buzzed, a message from Marisol. "Annie wants to know if listening days end." Ethan smiled faintly and typed back, "They don't. They just get quieter." He set the phone down and turned off the lamp. Once, he left it that way. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Not prime time, not dramatic, just a line on a calendar that most people would overlook if they weren't waiting for it. Ethan arrived early. Not because he needed to, but because he wanted to understand how these places breathed before they filled with voices. The courtroom was smaller than he remembered from his younger years, the wood darker, the air faintly stale with old paper and recirculated patience. Justice, he had learned, rarely announced itself. It waited. Caleb Mercer was already seated when Ethan entered. Thinner, paler, not defeated, exactly, but stripped of the insulation that once protected him. No entourage, no whispered conversations, just a man sitting with his hands folded, staring straight ahead. Mercer did not turn. Ethan took his seat behind the line reserved for observers. He had been advised not to attend. It wasn't necessary. It didn't help the optics. He came anyway, because Annie had taught him something simple and irreversible. Presence mattered. The proceedings unfolded in careful language. Cooperation agreements. Evidence entered into record. Names spoken aloud that had lived too long in silence. Mercer's attorney spoke of remorse, of mistakes, of influence misunderstood. Ethan listened without reacting. When it was over, Mercer finally looked back. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. There was no hatred there, no apology either, just recognition. Mercer nodded once. Ethan did not return it. Outside, reporters waited, but Ethan took a side exit and stepped into the gray morning alone. The city moved around him, indifferent and alive. He felt no triumph, only closure. That afternoon, he went somewhere he hadn't planned to. The community center. The James Hart Community Center stood on a corner that had once been forgotten. Fresh paint, wide windows. A banner announcing after-school programs fluttered in the breeze. Children's laughter spilled out through an open door. Unguarded and unafraid, Ethan hesitated at the threshold. Then he went in. Annie was sitting on the floor with a group of kids, building something out of blocks that leaned dangerously but hadn't fallen yet. Marisol stood nearby, talking with another parent. Her posture relaxed in a way Ethan hadn't seen before. Annie looked up and spotted him immediately. She stood and walked over, serious as ever. "Did it happen?" "Yes," Ethan said. She searched his face. "Is it over?" "For him," Ethan replied. "Yes." She nodded, absorbing that. "Good." Marisol approached, surprised but not startled. "I didn't expect you. I wasn't sure I should come," Ethan said honestly. "You listened anyway," Annie said. Ethan smiled. They walked through the center together. Classrooms, a small library, a kitchen where volunteers prepared snacks. On one wall hung a mural of the neighborhood, bright and hopeful, and not entirely accurate. "It's not perfect," Marisol said, almost apologetically. "It's honest," Ethan replied. "That's better." They sat on a bench near the windows, while Annie returned to her blocks. Outside, an older man taught a boy how to fix a bicycle chain. Their heads bent together in concentration. "This place matters," Ethan said quietly. "It was your idea," Marisol replied. "It was your courage," he said. She shook her head. It was Annie's voice. Ethan watched the child across the room, her brow furrowed as she negotiated the stability of her structure. "Yes," he said. "It was." That evening, Ethan declined a dinner invitation and went home early. The city lights felt harsher than usual, the noise less forgiving. He poured a drink he didn't touch and sat by the window, thinking about the way systems bent only when someone leaned on them long enough. His phone buzzed. A message from Robert. "It's done. Full cooperation confirmed. Charges expanding." Quietly, Ethan typed back, "Good." Another message followed, this one from an unfamiliar number. "Thank you for not looking away. No signature." Ethan stared at the words longer than necessary, then set the phone down. Across town, Annie lay in bed. The window cracked just enough to let in night air. Marisol sat beside her, reading softly. "Mom," Annie said. "Yes? Do you think bad people stop being bad?" Marisol considered the question. "I think some people learn. Some don't." "Then what happens?" Annie asked. Marisol smiled gently. "Then, good people keep listening." Annie thought about that and closed her eyes. In his apartment, Ethan stood and turned off the lamp. Once, the room stayed quiet. Not empty. Quiet. The invitation arrived without ceremony. No embossed letterhead. No courier. Just an email forwarded through legal channels, its language neutral to the point of impersonality. Community Accountability Forum. Closed session. Attendance requested. Ethan read it twice, then once more with the quiet attention he had learned to give things that looked harmless but weren't. These forums had become fashionable lately, public gestures of transparency, carefully moderated, emotionally charged but strategically safe. This one was different. Names were attached, specifics outlined, testimony expected. He accepted. The forum was held in a converted municipal hall, the kind of place that smelled faintly of old carpet and fresh paint. Folding chairs filled the room, arranged in a circle instead of rows. That choice alone told Ethan everything he needed to know. This wasn't about speeches. It was about listening. Marisol sat beside him, hands folded in her lap. Annie was not there. This was an adult room, and for once, that boundary mattered. Across the circle sat former employees, junior partners, community advocates, and two people Ethan recognized immediately, individuals who had benefited from Caleb Mercer's rise and suffered from his fall. "New cameras, new press." A woman in her 60s spoke first. Her voice trembled only once. "For 20 years, she said, we were told this was how things worked, that if we wanted stability, we had to accept silence." She looked directly at Ethan, not accusing, measuring. "You didn't build that system," she said, "but you inherited the power to change how it ends." Ethan nodded. "I don't deny that." Another voice followed. Then another. Stories layered over each other. Quiet compromises. Fear dressed as professionalism. The slow erosion of conscience in environments that rewarded compliance and punished memory. Ethan did not interrupt. When it was his turn, he stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "I won't defend what shouldn't have existed," he said. "And I won't claim distance where there was proximity. I benefited from structures that made it easier not to ask certain questions." A murmur moved through the circle. "I'm here," he continued, "because a child reminded me that silence is a decision, and decisions have consequences." He sat. No applause followed. That was right. The forum ended without resolution, only commitment. Policy reviews, oversight boards, independent audits. The work, no one photographed. As they left, Marisol touched Ethan's arm. "You didn't try to fix it all." "No," he said. "I tried to stay." Outside, the city breathed around them. Cars passed. Someone laughed nearby. Life, indifferent and ongoing. "Annie would be proud," Marisol said. Ethan shook his head. "Annie would tell me this isn't finished." Marisol smiled. She would. That night, Ethan returned home later than usual. The apartment felt different now. Less like a place to retreat, more like a place to reflect. He sat at the table and opened his laptop, not to work, but to write. He wrote policies, not statements, safeguards, protocols, simple things, made explicit, listening procedures, anonymous reporting structures that couldn't be quietly buried. It was unglamorous work. He welcomed that. Across the city, Annie lay awake longer than she should have, staring at the faint glow from the streetlight through her curtains. Marisol had kissed her goodnight and left the door open just enough. "Mom?" Annie called softly. "Yes? Do grown-ups ever get tired of doing the right thing?" Marisol paused at the doorway. "Sometimes. Then what?" "Then they rest," Marisol said, "and do it again tomorrow." Annie considered this. "Okay." The next morning, the news carried a small story on page 5, not a headline, a brief mention of structural reforms tied to an ongoing investigation. No names highlighted, no villains celebrated, just change. At school, Annie's teacher pulled her aside after class. "Your drawing is on the bulletin board," she said. The one about listening. Annie nodded. Did people like it? They stopped to read it, the teacher said. That's better. That evening, Ethan visited the community center again. No announcement. No entourage. He brought a box of books and left them quietly in the library. Annie found him there anyway. You came back, she said. I said I would, he replied. She looked at him seriously. Some people only listen once. I'm trying to listen longer than that, Ethan said. She nodded, satisfied. As they stood together near the window, the lights inside the center flickered briefly, a harmless electrical hiccup, quickly resolved. Annie glanced at the switch. Didn't touch it. Didn't need to. The danger no longer lived in the dark. The last change arrived quietly, the way real endings often did. It was not marked by celebration or closure, not by justice declared complete. It came in the form of a letter slipped under a door at the community center, addressed in careful handwriting. To anyone who still believes listening matters. Ethan read it alone in the early morning light, the building empty except for the hum of heating vents and the distant sound of traffic waking up. The letter was unsigned, but its meaning was unmistakable. A former employee, a silent witness, someone who had seen, heard, and finally decided to speak. The truth, once invited, had a way of multiplying. By noon, the letter had been forwarded through the proper channels. By evening, it had become part of a larger record. No press release followed. No public statement. Just another piece added to a structure finally built to hold weight. Ethan closed his laptop and leaned back, feeling not relief, but completion. The kind that didn't end a story, only a chapter of it. At the center, Annie sat on the floor with her back against the wall, coloring carefully inside lines she had drawn herself. Marisol watched from a nearby chair, a book open but unread. Mom, Annie said without looking up. Do you think people remember who helped them when they were scared? Marisol smiled faintly. Sometimes they don't remember the person, just the feeling. That's okay, Annie said. Feelings last longer. Marisol reached out and touched her daughter's hair. You're right. Ethan approached quietly, not wanting to interrupt. Annie noticed him anyway. You look like someone who finished something, she said. I did, Ethan replied. Does that mean you're leaving? He considered the question honestly. No, he said. It means I'm staying differently. Today. She accepted that, returning to her drawing. On the page was a simple image, a light switch, a doorway, and people walking out together instead of alone. That evening, they shared dinner at a small table in the center's kitchen. Nothing special. Soup, bread, food that existed to nourish, not impress. Marisol spoke first. We're moving. Ethan looked up, surprised but not unsettled. Where? Not far, she said. Closer to the school. Closer to here, Annie added. It's still ours. Ethan nodded. That matters. Marisol hesitated. I want Annie to grow up knowing this place isn't a rescue. It's a foundation. That's exactly what it should be, Ethan said. When it was time to leave, Annie walked him to the door. You know, she said, I don't turn lights off 3 times anymore. I noticed, Ethan replied. She thought for a moment. I still remember why I did. That's enough, he said. She opened the door for him, holding it with both hands like it mattered. Outside, the night was calm. Not silent, but steady. The kind of quiet that came from balance, not fear. Ethan walked a few steps, then turned back. Annie, he said. Yes? You changed a lot of things. She frowned slightly. I just talked, he smiled. Exactly. Weeks passed. The story faded from conversation. Other stories replaced it. Louder ones, easier ones. But structures remained. Policies held. People spoke sooner, listened longer. At the James Hart Community Center, a new plaque appeared near the entrance. No donors listed. No names honored. Just a sentence. Silence is a choice. Listening is an action. Annie learned to read it aloud one afternoon, stumbling only once. She didn't ask who wrote it. She already knew. On a crisp morning months later, Ethan stood in his apartment. The city spread out before him. He turned off the lamp as sunlight filled the room. Once, he left it that way, not because he was waiting for danger, but because he trusted what came after listening. The end did not feel final. It felt earned. The story reminds us that justice does not always arrive with noise or authority. It often begins with the quiet courage to speak and the humility to listen. Real power is not found in wealth, status, or control, but in the willingness to protect the vulnerable, especially when their voices are easy to ignore. When adults choose to truly listen to children, to the overlooked, to uncomfortable truths, they interrupt cycles of corruption and fear. The lesson is simple but demanding. Silence is never neutral, and listening is not passive. It is an act of moral responsibility that can change lives, restore dignity, and slowly bend an imperfect world toward something better. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.